And we, within about 6 months of us getting married, that we were dispatched to the UK. His company wanted him back. So his wise words of, what would you call it, a vocational advice to me, he says, and in his British accent and his dry pan sense of humor, I'm afraid to tell you that an American criminal lawyer in the middle of the UK is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Oh, thank you, I thought. But he was right. Ugh. So, what did I do? Well, I had a fair amount of time on my hands until I became gainfully employed. So, one of the things that I enjoyed doing before I even left for the UK was baking. True. Well, when I got there, I discovered that not only to make the things that he liked and the things I would like to try, there's quite a bit of translation involved. So here's my plan for this evening. So because of the festive season, we're going to hone in on particularly holiday baking. But before we even get that far, I'm planning on filling you in a bit on a bit of the background of the people on the show, and particularly weights and measures and a lot of other things that come up, translation issues, lost in translation, shall we call it. There is quite a bit to know, actually. Not too much. It's just a little bit of a boost, because there is a recipe packet that accompanies this talk that I have selected things that you'll see going by. This is a hard talk to hear if you haven't had dinner, so hopefully you might have had a bite to eat. But that will hopefully enable you to feel like you can take these on, because they are the real thing. They are authentic recipes. And you know, just need a little bit of introduction, frankly, to get into them. So you should be seeing a flaming Christmas pudding. I see it. There it is. Now, do we flame ours anymore? No, we don't. And that is for a good reason, but more on that later. Yeah. So let's get not too far afield before I maybe explain a little bit of some of the culture and geography and nomenclature behind the UK. A lot of Americans ask, well, I'm confused. Are they from the UK? Are they from England? Are they from Great Britain? How do you describe them? British, English? What is it? So here's the story. The UK is shorthand for the United Kingdom of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So you basically have a 4-in-1 situation going on. Yes, they speak English, but haha, when you get there, you think they speak British English. American English is considerably different, as you find out the hard way. Then Welsh is alive and well in Wales, and that is on street signs, taught in schools. Usually, Americans find this fairly hard to pronounce, very heavy in consonants. And then about 7% of people in Scotland speak Scottish Gaelic. So that's a small percentage, but in addition to English. So 63 million people overall in the UK, but 10 million of them alone live in the Greater London area. So within the population centers, the big cities are actually quite dense. It is right if you were to call everybody from the Big Island British. Why? It goes back to history. So, for a period of about 400 years, starting in AD 43, the Romans occupied the Big Island, and their name for it, Britannia. So, this is the derivation of Great Britain. It gets a little confusing because over the years, the varying tribes and alliances have changed, but you can safely call everybody from the Big Island British. And by passport, people from Northern Ireland are too, even though they're on a separate island. That is even more a little bit confusing for people to grasp, that you can feel Irish as someone from Northern Ireland, but you actually hold a UK passport. If you were from Republic of Ireland, that is the little white part of the island of Ireland underneath, then that means you're going to hold an EU passport. When I lived in the UK, I lived about here. So this is about 70 miles due north of London. That's in a city called Peterborough. My husband's originally from Coventry. So that's a city right outside Warwick. That's the name in the Midlands, smack in the middle of England. So would he ever object to being called British? Never. By rights, he's English. So if you happen to know the country that someone from this neck of the woods is from, it might be a little more deferential to call them by that nationality. So, for example, here in Peoria, Illinois, we had a Welsh next door neighbor. Really, that was very unexpected. And this really comes up in earnest when it comes to the Scottish. So, Scottish is the nationality, Scotch is the drink. And how it becomes important is that there is yet a minority, but kind of a vocal minority in Scotland. That is the Scottish nationalist movement. They would like to break away from the UK. And thus far, they have been unsuccessful, but they would very much appreciate being called Scottish and not British. Insert many hundreds of years of history in the background here. Well, having said that, the next topic that was of huge importance, my husband pointed out, is tea. He said, now you're talking about baked goods. You've got to be discussing tea. Yes, they're like the yin and the yang. Oh, yes, I assured him. So a lot of Americans will ask, well, what is a decent cup of UK tea? Well, you have some options. So the reason that you see the teacup looks almost coffee-esque is that most Brits are drinking strong black tea with a splash of milk, sugar or sweetener optional. That's the contents of that cup. And the biscuits on the side, biscuit meaning cookie. So if you are truly in the mood to be very genuine in your tea drinking and you'd like to recreate the experience, I can tell you the editorial comment desk here at Shea Claire Evans, meaning my husband, he is not a fan of Lipton tea. He said it is too weak. So alternatives. I have it on good authority that there is a Costco World Market in Ann Arbor. So you might check that out as a fine venue for a lot of the ingredients that I'm going to be mentioning, tea included. And then even TJ Maxx is a fine place to look. Sometimes good international aisles in grocery stores. Meijer, I can think of. I believe Michigan has Meijers. We have them here in Illinois. That's a very good international aisle generally. So here's some suggestions. Thai Fu, extra strong. Note the extra strong. So this is definitely going to pass muster. This is one you might find at TJ Maxx. Secondly, this is an easy one in a lot of grocery international aisles, Twinings. So that's a reliably good black tea blend. Next is the UK's number one tea, so they say. England's number one tea, PG Tips. This is a reliably good black tea. You can get it at Meijer, at local grocery stores, good international aisles, and definitely at Costco World Market. So there you have some submissions. If you'd like to go local and see what it tastes like, if you hadn't before, those would be good ones to try. All right, well, let's get into the show a little bit. So when I first arrived in the UK, there was this show that I got into, and it was going by the name The Great British Bake Off. Oh, that's different. Why is it the baking show here? Actually, it's a bit of a legal problem. They think that there might be potential for a trademark infringement claim with the Pillsbury Bake Off when it hits our shores. So when the show crosses the big pond, it magically transforms from the Bake Off into the Great British Baking Show. So when I arrived to live in England, it was first run TV. This is brand new on television. And a little bit of a background, they had these judges initially. The man that you see is Paul Hollywood, and he, of course, is still on. Was he known in the UK before he got the show? No, he was a total unknown. Now, in cooking and baking circles, he's a baker and he has fine credentials that way, but no, he wasn't a household name. Contrast that with Mary Berry. So Mary Berry is quite well known before this show. She has been on the food scene in the UK for years. She has a very long-standing relationship with BBC Television and their website. Good Food is the name of their website. So she's written for lots of women's magazines, and yes, people are familiar with her. So time moves on, and they introduce this concept in addition to the judges of these co-hosts. And at one point in time, there were a comedy duo named Mel and Sue. So Sue is on the left holding the cake that says off. That's Sue Perkins. And Mel is the one holding the cake that says is. Were they well known in the UK before they were put on this show? Oh, yes, they are famous. So how? They met back at Cambridge as students in 1993, and they were both part of the Cambridge Footlights. That's a comedy troupe. Oh, that is a big deal. Stop the needle on the record, because that comedy troupe is the same one that gave birth to Monty Python, the holy grail of British comedy. So to be associated with that is quite a big deal. And they went on to have lots of television appearances, and they were writers and on tour in their own right. They had their own chat show, a talk show. So I give you a little bit of a tip when it comes to Sue Perkins. If you enjoy British humor, food, and a bit of history thrown in, you might, as a sideline, really enjoy a show called The Supersizers Eat. And then there's going to be a period of history filled in. Sue Perkins was on that show. It's of the same era as when the Great British Baking Show started. So she is paired with a man, he's a very grumpy young man. His name is Giles Corran. He's kind of a curmudgeon, but funny. And Sue Perkins is whip smart. And they are both, frankly, very whip smart. And they banter back and forth. He is the former food critic for the Times of London. So the premise is that they dwell in a period of history for a week. They have their blood work drawn before and after. They live in the right accommodations of this period of history they're reenacting. They have the clothing and they eat the food and they see how things go. And that was based on actually a US documentary called Super Size Me, where a guy tries to eat McDonald's for an entire month. So hence the blood work. They do not fare so well from a health perspective in the French Revolution, if my memory serves. It's very meaty and it's very red winey. And so that and the 80s. The 80s, they did better, but halfway through the week, they took away their croissant for breakfast and replaced it with Pop-Tarts with a note from the producers that said the stock market has crashed. You can find this on YouTube, actually, and it's other places. Last I looked, it was Netflix and Acorn TV and BritBox. So have at it. It's very funny, and it does a lot of different periods of history. I hesitate to call it reality TV, but technically, yes, with a bit of an education. So other people on the show, if you're familiar with it, Prue Leith, it was not unfamiliar to you. She was famous before she got the show now, but her profile is much higher, I would say now. So her claim to fame is that she ran a cookery school, and that is for cookery, they would say cooking school, and Leith's Cookery Bible. It is a Bible. She's not kidding, because my husband happened to own this book before I met him, and he still does. Part of the allure, I think. It is probably 2.5 to 3 inches thick on onion skin. It has about 6 different recipes for anything that's British that you'd ever want. So a good one to know about. Then in later years, they're introducing Matt Lucas and Noel Fielding as co-hosts. Matt Lucas, really famous in the UK, definitely a household name. He got his start on a sketch comedy show called Little Britain. And he's been in all sorts, TV, film, you name it. He's a comedian, he hosts things. Now, Noel Fielding, he is famous too, but to a lesser extent. He's more, I'd say, he's a bit closer to the B list. Someone once described him to me, they thought he was rather random. I think that's true. And he actually hosted a game show that we used to watch when we lived in the UK before, or right at the same time sometimes as this came along. So yes, he was known. But I'm going to offer you a few more names in British baking circles, and that is because the ones that you see on the show are not the be-all, end-all at all. If you see recipes with these labels from these celebrity chefs on them, be not afraid. Here's the first. Is this a mistake, you say? No, the hairy bikers. Bear with me. The Brits have a saying, does it do what it says on the tin? That means, is there truth in advertising? Are they are they hairy? Check. Are they bikers? Check. Yes. They're food celebrities, believe it or not. So they got their start back behind the scenes of UK television. They were workers on BBC television productions together. Somehow, someone thought to put them together. They are very gregarious and they love food and they like to tour on their motorbikes around the country. And they've had multiple cookbooks and multiple TV series. If their stamp is on something that you're baking, it's probably going to be fairly good. Next, these women are like Oprah in culinary circles in the UK. They are famous enough they can go by one name. That is Nigella, and Delia Smith. So more Americans, I would say, know Nigella because she has more of a presence. She has a terrific website, nigella.com, if you're into baking or just recipe surfing at all. And the beauty of it She accommodates us Americans. She has a toggle on all her recipes that will convert out of imperial units into cups. Yay, this is like 90% of the work done for you. So there's that. And then Delia Smith is more old school, shall we say. That cookbook is from the 90s. So she has aged a bit since that picture. She has very steadfastly good recipes that she's kind of like a non-felonious Martha Smith or Martha Stewart, shall we say. She is also part owner of the Norwich City Football Club, a soccer team. So if you go see a soccer match in Norwich and you have anything to eat, likely it's going to be very good. So let's get into translation. And just to give you a few insider tips here. If you are doing a British recipe, it is not necessary to write down all the conversions into cups out of grams. And things that are the dry, they're generally going to provide you a measurement in grams. How do I cope with this? I have a digital food scale that I rely on. So in baking, you're combining dry with dry. That's kind of the rule. So how to do it? You have your mixing bowl, you have your digital food scale set to grams, you put the bowl on the scale and zero it out. So it reads 0. Then add the right amount in grams of flour that the recipe calls for, 0 it out again. And do the same for your sugar and whatever other ingredients they're giving you in dry gram quantities. And that way you don't have to actually write anything down ahead of time or do research. You can do it on the fly. So having said that, let's think ingredients briefly. A Bramley apple, what is that? It's a particular sort of British, commonly asked for apple, but for now, just know that you can substitute Granny Smiths or Braeburns and get kind of much the same results. Demerara sugar, a novel name, likely you've had it. And here it is very large, crunchy crystals that goes by the name sugar in the raw. So if you've been to restaurants and seen brown packets, that's Demerara sugar. Castor sugar is what we refer to as granulated white sugar. They say castor because it can flow through a castor. It's a finer grain. It's not super fine. That's something else entirely. Muscovado sugar, a fun name, but here's a clue. It occurs in light and dark. It's brown sugar, just hiding under the Muscovado name. Porridge oats are U.S. rolled oats. Treacle is dark molasses. There is a cousin, so dark treacle is dark molasses. Light treacle is something called golden syrup. More in that in a moment too. There's double cream. Double cream is one of the many, many forms of creams that the UK seems to have. It's heavy cream. Then there's pouring cream. That's light cream, or sometimes even half and half can pass as pouring cream. Icing sugar is powdered sugar. Sultanas are golden raisins. An essence of something is an extract. Then the controversial land of suet. So suet traditionally is the fat that surrounds beef kidneys. Well, that's kind of fallen out of favor. So instead, what you can do is substitute. Crisco comes in sticks, as does butter, most people know. Freeze those and grate them once frozen into the same quantity that you would be using suet in the recipe, and you get pretty much the same outcome. And then corn flour is cornstarch. This is a distinctly British ingredient. We have it, custard. Now, when the Brits call for custard, they're looking for hot egg custard, and you can make that. It's in the category of caloric things we can put on our desserts / puddings for 100 Alex, and there are many. So this can be made with either just cream or half and half and eggs and as much sugar as you like. Or I would say that most Brits are using custard powder. It's not instant, so it's not like Jell-O, instant pudding. You have got to cook this. So this is very easily gotten at Costco World Market. We have bought it there many times. And again, Meijer and International Food Aisles will carry it too. But I feel like I ought to give you a bit of a warning. So for that, I will go to my real life example and a true life story. So here is Bird's original custard powder. Most Brits are going to use this this is kind of the predominant brand there. Well, once upon a time, my husband, at the time, not my husband, still fiance, if not boyfriend, I forget, but he decides to have a dinner party. I'm invited, I'm helping. And he is inviting a bunch of expat Brits here in the US. So someone remarked that it had been a while since they'd had custard, and this sounded good to them. Okay, well, he happens to have bird's custard powder. Someone else remarks in passing that in my family, men made the custard, which I find highly inflammatory. Whoa, I thought, well, we got to nip this in the bud. So I can read, I cook, I'll put my hand up, I'll make the custard. Well, I had a lot of other things going on. So when I get into reading about it, I see there are handy directions on the back. And the one that I'm focusing on says microwave, microwave, wahoo. So I follow it to the letter. And does it set up on the right time? No, absolutely not. So I add more powder, I stir, I come back, I add more time, and this cycle continues, wash and repeat. Well, ultimately, when I do get back there, it has set up. It is supposed to be a lovely lemony light yellow. Mine is self-tanner orange. It's supposed to be fairly pourable. No, mine has extreme viscosity, and then I leave it for a moment and come back, and the spoon has now congealed in the center. It's like a giant custard hot lollipop that I can use the spoon to extract as a stick out of the Pyrex. We could eat this with a fork and knife, but we can't pour it on anything. So I have to confess to the diners, and I've used up all the custard powder. So they were pretty nice about it. A lot of this, one person said, "Oh, my precious custard powder," unquote. Who would that be? Well, what went wrong? It's this. That whole thing about microwave is a pack of lies. This is the direction set that I wanted. It is called on the hob. On the hob, not at the hob. On the hob means on the stove top. The hob is the stove top. In a pan that has a nice heavy bottom, so you don't scorch the milk, constant stirring, and heat control. So those are the ways forward. You can do it, but yeah. So moving on, I give you my submission just so that you don't make the same painful mistake that I did. Let's go into the versions of treacle, light and dark. So there is, see how black? Gosh, black treacle. And then it's got this cousin, golden syrup, sometimes called light treacle, a very British ingredient. So black treacle is really easy to substitute with plain blackstrap molasses. You can lighten up on that if you don't like the bitterness sometimes. But a lot of British recipes, particularly puddings that are steamed, those are cakes, basically, in that case, they're going to call for golden syrup. Is it substitutable? It's hard. Golden syrup is golden syrup. These are both byproducts of the sugar refining process, one dark, one light. So golden syrup really has the same kind of a flavor. It's very buttery and caramely, and it tastes a lot like liquefied brown sugar. We just don't have that ingredient here. So again, you were lucky if the Costco World Market is on your fairly short distance doorstep. That's a great place to look for it. I send people to Amazon as a last resort. They tend to be kind of expensive, but it's been made in the same design tin since 1881. It's an old standby. Tate and Lyle is the sugar refiner. It's kind of like C&H, Tate and Lyle. But what to do if you are offered, and if you're going to ship this, if you really would like to use this in a recipe you have that calls for it, they may offer you a convenient squeezy bottle for bakers. Say no, because this stuff is so tacky and sticky and thick that if a squeezy bottle were to leak or be punctured in shipping, it would be complete sticky, tacky flypaper pandemonium. So I would definitely stick to the metal tins, and they make them. In fact, yes, here I have one right here. So still alive and well. Flour. Flour can be daunting. Why? There's all sorts. Plain flour in the UK is US all-purpose flour. Lots of times their recipes call for self-raising flour. What is that? It's all-purpose flour with baking powder added in a particular proportion. And I used to tell people how to do it. And then I clued in that King Arthur flour makes this, and it's already done. It's measured. You don't have to actually do any proportional measuring. And there's other brands, McDougall's this one. So it's fairly easily found. I don't go into that anymore. Strong flour, that is US bread flour. Strong is referring to gluten. And then wholemeal flour is just US whole wheat flour. Temperatures. When I arrived in the UK, we were moving into my husband's home that he had rented out for all the years he lived in the US. So part of the orientation was the kitchen, of course. And they inform me that, more he does, that the stove works on something called gas marks. Oh, that sounded fairly unsavory. I really didn't want to inquire further, but I felt I needed to because we wanted to eat. So, what's a gas mark? I had to ask, and I braced for the answer. All it is, it turns out, is there's a gas flame in this oven that's ranked from 1 to 9 in strength. That's it. So the dial is from 1 to 9, and the gas mark setting is in the recipe. Well, mostly in a British recipe, you're going to get a temperature called for in Celsius. The US is one of 3 countries left in the world that is still operating on Fahrenheit. So that is not a hard conversion, certainly on Google. That's an easy one to look up. If you have a really old recipe, you might even get them asking for a cool oven or a moderately hot oven or something along those lines. And that little table that you see in front of you, that's a Google. It's pretty easy to find. Then sometimes you'll hear, especially on the baking show, recipes around it, they'll give you a direction about a fan oven. What are they referring to? That's a convection oven. You generally have to drop the temperature if you're using convection. Liquids, this is the last one. You might get lucky, and a UK recipe might give you a measurement in cups. However, most are going to call for liquid measurements in either milliliters or liquid ounces, largely milliliters. Most Americans don't have a problem with that because if you're using our Pyrex glass measuring cups, just twist them around. One side is ounces, the other side is milliliters. A dessert spoonful of something is about a teaspoon, but here it gets a bit tricky. Pints. So if something is asking for a pint of liquid, that is not a US pint. They are actually, there's a difference. So I offer for your consideration, this is a UK pint glass. So this is this exact same size you'd get if you go down to the pub. And let's see, there's the Crown. This is an imperial pint. What does this mean? It is 19.2 liquid ounces to the top. It says pint to line right up there, then half pint below it, as opposed to a US pint. So a US pint would be 16 liquid ounces, 2 cups. Oh, so just FYI, if you have a British recipe asking for a pint, you're going to need to top it up with 3.2 more ounces of fluid. Otherwise, you're going to run a bit dry. Okay, so with that, we're almost ready for a bit of food talk. And one other item I've kind of alluded to, a lot of UK puddings or desserts are steamed. And at the end, I have a steamer. I can kind of show you how this happens. But the case in point that's extremely famous, that's always steamed, is Christmas pudding. People ask, is it fruitcake? First question I usually get. No, it's Christmas pudding. That is totally unhelpful, you say. Okay, let me explain. So this is a heavy-duty steamed fruit. See, I hesitate to say fruit cake. It's not. I'll give you a recipe as an example in the next screen. But it can be made super early. In fact, maybe 2.5 weeks ago on a Sunday was Stirrup Sunday. That is a Victorian tradition of when people can make their Christmas pudding and it steams so long, they store it until Christmas. They want to. They want the flavor to marry. They think this is a good thing. So it gets topped any number of ways. Brandy butter, the sauce that you have in the traditional picture, the white sauce is usually brandy sauce. Custard, we talked about that. Pouring cream, now you know what that is. Ice cream, or there's always flaming. Oh, more in a moment. So what's in it? How you go about making it. You start with the fruit and you soak it. There's a million different sorts of dried fruits in Christmas pudding. Raisins, sultanas, currants, dried cranberries. Then you get into the mixed peels, the juice and zest of an orange, brandy, molasses, and bicarb of soda. That's going to be soaked. So all the fruit has to rehumidify. somehow. You can do it in water or tea. I've seen it done in, usually in a big bowl in the fridge overnight, with stout, Guinness, rum, brandy, whatever it is, as long as it has to rehumidify the fruit. You don't want awful dry pudding. That's bad. So once you do that, you combine it with a fairly small amount of cake batter. Sugar of a grated apple. It's very moist and it's going to be steamed. So it's super moist on top of that. Some people know it as they've heard the term figgy pudding or plum pudding. Is it the same? It is. So you see an example of it's being properly flamed in that picture. The first time my husband made this for us, my family here in the US and me, we got into a bit of fisticuffs about it because it doesn't measure. He's a pantser. I say he goes by the seat of his pants when he's cooking, and he throws things in. And whatever the recipe says is just a suggestion. On the other hand, I measure and I weigh stuff, and we were not getting along here. So I thought, the truth is, he holds the ultimate cultural trump card. He's had this since he was a little kid. If he wants to do it, let him do it. And so I clear off. And he makes it up and he steams it 8 hours, really, really long time. He tends it in the night like a little child, like a baby. He has a big stock pot. If he's making two, he'll use across two burners our turkey roaster and a Pyrex glass dish, like a half circle, that we can coat with a layer of wax paper. It's all getting greased, just like a cake pan would. And then a layer of tin foil on the wax paper and tied up like a package. And I'll show you a picture later in the program. So he, as a presentation piece, would like to flame it. I don't know a thing about this. Okay. So he pours an entire small bottle of brandy on the thing and tries to light it directly. No, this didn't work. And I'm really thankful it didn't work. My grandma was well into her 90s at this point and had it lit. Talk about a fire hazard. It would have burned for 2 days. Where we needed to be is the picture. If you're going to flame it, you have to light your liquor in a saucepan or sometimes a ladle and then pour it on top. And that is the way you do it. So this goes back to the Middle Ages, this dessert. It used to be suet, flour, sugar, raisins, nuts, and spices all in a cheesecloth bag and boiled. And that would expand the contents and fill out the corners and make it plum. Oh, so it's not plum as in the fruit, plum pudding. True. It refers to this other reference. Can you put on it? Well, we've talked about that a bit. Custard, cream, something called clotted cream. Yes, it sounds vile, but suspend your disbelief. More in a slide coming next. Brandy butter. I say flaming optional because we have turned the entire 180 degrees, pun intended. We do ice cream now because it's far less likely the burn unit shows up or we go there. Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, began a tradition of putting a sixpence coin in the pudding for a lucky diner to find. And we do not do that because my mother is a retired dental hygienist, and clunking down with your teeth on a coin is her idea of hell. So we don't do it. Well, this is a really rich dessert, a pudding. What to do? You're going to have leftovers. So the one on the left, this is actually, I saw today, Nigella Lawson's recipe of the day is Christmas Pudini bonbons. It's on the left. She's taking golden syrup and she's rolling Christmas pudding leftovers into round bonbons. And they get coated with a bit of icing and a little bit of citron to make them look like holly bits. Then there's Delia. So she is creating something called Christmas pudding crackers. So what she's meaning to riff on is this. This is a Christmas cracker. It's a party decoration. This explodes. This is a tiny explosive in here. When you pull it apart, you get a big pop and there's prizes and things inside and a crown, all sorts. Well, she's rolling up leftovers and tying it in pastry. Might be a bit fussy. So I offer you an alternative. I prefer the Christmas pudding ice cream bomb, which is it's kind of spices plus pudding and glacé fruits that have been incorporated into frozen ice cream. Oh, yeah, fairly easy too. Well, Christmas cake comes up a lot too. And these lovely, sometimes silk ribbons around it, decorations on the top. Is it fruit cake? First question of all desserts in the UK. Is it fruitcake? Yes, this is fruitcake. So you have a winner here. Raisins, glacé cherries, currants, sultanas, brandy or sherry. If you want to feed it, that is after it's baked, you add a few tablespoons a day for a while to incorporate and they do that in the US too. Oranges, that zest of a couple oranges, and then your cake ingredients. Well, they can make this fairly well ahead as well. There's a couple of things they're doing to keep it fresher. Sometimes you'll see them coated in apricot jam and they put on a layer of marzipan. So marzipan is an almond, a sweet almond paste. They're rolling it out into a layer and they seal it up. And then what's really holding the moisture in, royal icing. So that white icing is hard. It's like edible Tupperware. So once that cake is coated, it's impervious to air so long as you're not cutting it. And they decorate them nicely. So more on marzipan. That is very common as ingredients go in British holiday baking. So in case you didn't know of it before, almond flour, powdered sugar, almond extract, rose water, and egg whites. So it has a big history. They think there are 15th century references to it in Italy and Germany, but long before that, they believed that it came out of the Middle East. Then, as far as England goes, they documented it there as late as the latter part of the 15th century. They tend to make marzipan mice at Christmas time. You'll see there's an example in the lower left. And then not only in the UK, but all over Europe, they like to carve it into fruits. And the picture in the middle is not a fruit stand, that's marzipan. And my favorite is the banana. That's been done lower left-hand corner. They are very, very good at it. Marzipan actually gets incorporated into a lot of cakes, these fruit cakes. As a matter of fact, British wedding cake traditionally is a fruit cake. And we had one, and our cake was covered in a layer of marzipan. And it just adds this nice little extra to it too. And the fruit cake is not so stodgy. Stodgy is a British term, heavy, weighing down. If it's good, it's very good. I find I'm not really a big fruitcake fan unless it's a British recipe because it seems it's just not so dense. So I alluded to this apple, this Bramley. And as I say, it's not readily available here, but if you're a purist, you could find it in North America. It's an heirloom species of apple, and it goes by the name Bramley seedling. Have I ever done this? No. I have just used my Braeburns or Granny Smiths and called it a day. So it gets called for a lot, though. You might see these recipes that ask for Bramleys and just know that you're going to need a nice tart cooking apple. In life, Bramleys are huge. They are really in excess. I've seen them in bigger than a softball, a US softball, and they grow all over the UK. So they're not particular to an area. So some of the fruits, though, in the UK are particular to areas, but the UK is full of microclimates. So it is unusually warm for a country based on how high up in the world it is. If you look at the globe, London is on the same lateral as Saskatchewan, Canada. And do they have anything resembling the same climate? Absolutely not. But there's a county I can think of south of London on the east side called Kent. It's on the ocean. And they grow a lot of the fruit for Wimbledon, in particular strawberries, the traditional dessert that you should be eating as you're watching Wimbledon matches live at the Old England Club is strawberries and cream. And they're going to train up the strawberries daily for those matches. So that's just interesting where their fruit comes from. A lot of it's grown there. So speaking of fruit, I had a limited experience of mince pies. When I was here still, I hadn't moved to the UK. My mother had used none such mincemeat that you can pull off the store shelves here. And that was my only experience of it. And frankly, I hated it. It was awful. And then fast forward to, I have this bias now against mince pies. And it seemed that in the UK, everybody's eating mince pies at Christmas time, holidays. Oh, they love them. They're in the stores early. They eat them often. People make them homemade or they just buy them. Extremely popular. And my husband said he had my mom's version of none such mince, and he kind of, and he said, Claire, this is not what British mince tastes like. What is it? So my best description is it's kind of like a apple and raisin pie filling that's been spiced with just your traditional holiday spices. It's very good. It's extremely fruity. And so for that, I love it. I'm a huge fruitarian. Sometimes they'll put alcohol in it, sometimes not, but totally different tasting than the American and such. So if you are tempted to do that, don't. Just make the little apple pie filling raisin version and your mince pies, and everybody will be happier because I think it's a lot more tasty. And the recipe's in the recipe packet for that too. So, something linked to a region. There's the Lake District, which is home to my all time favorite UK dessert, sticky toffee pudding. So, for the holidays, they have put pears in this at this time of year, which was a bit seasonal and a little bit special. So you see, but one of the lakes in the picture, that's Lake Windermere. It's particularly picturesque. It's in the northwest of England, and there is a Lake District National Park that you see outlined in green. So sticky toffee, this is going to be caramel. This is a caramel cake, basically. It's a cake with a layer of very good caramel sauce on the top. But before I get too far afield, I like to give you a cultural segment. Perhaps the most famous resident of the Lake District was not from there originally, Beatrix Potter. She's a Londoner by birth, but she's incredibly unique and lucky in her time that she is wealthy and famous on the back of the Tale of Peter Rabbit and a single woman. And she could decide completely how she spent her money. So she opted to buy property in the Lake District. She began in this little village called Sawrey, and she bought Hilltop Cottage. You can still visit it. And she kept buying. And over the years, her surroundings there, she loved it. You know, she was an illustrator at heart, would inform her books, her illustrations. There's one called The Tale of the Jam Roly-Poly. It's a sequel to Tom Kitten. And Tom is rolled up by rats into pastry and he's buttered, and they attempt to bake him into a very traditional British dessert, a roly-poly. Well, she said that she had never seen such big rats as the one she saw at Hilltop Cottage. So upon her death, she did a lovely thing. She gifted her land holdings to the National Trust. So that is a land, it is a land trust. I think last time I looked, it's about the sixth largest landholder in all of the UK. And their motto is for everyone, forever. They have a huge catalog of holdings that they have been gifted, donated, and they maintain them for the public. You can buy a membership card, and that's usually, I think it's under $100 a year. You can buy it in the US and take it over in the UK. Have a look at their website. It's nationaltrust.co.uk, I want to say. Very close to that, if not. And you can see all the properties they manage if there's things of interest, and there's many properties they manage, including her Hilltop Cottage. You can go see where she lived. You just show your card and you get in on one fee for the year instead of having to pay recurring readmission every time you see a different site that they manage. So that's a bit of a money saving. And if a lot of what she gave away ultimately became Lake District National Park. Well, more on the dessert. And what is it exactly? It's super moist. Sometimes they steam it, sometimes they bake it. This toffee sauce, when you see toffee, think caramel. That's the translation. It's an outlier as British desserts go. It's super sweet. Most British puddings are not. So this one is a little bit different that way. So there's these various origin stories of how did it come to the UK, because it's like a national pudding now. It's a big deal. It's on every pub menu. So the stories are either Australian or New Zealand airmen brought it into the Lake District, that recipe. And it's a little nebulous, but it's a classic. So if you go to a pub, you're going to see it. And then bread and butter pudding is another very traditional one. Jam roly-poly is it's a pastry or a cake usually that's had jam rolled up in a pinwheel and cut into slices. And then something fun, spotted dick. What is that? It's just sponge cake, and the spots are little currants, dried currants that have been incorporated into the batter. So here's the bad news. I hate to break it to you. It's a bit of rocket fuel. So Mary Berry's recipe for this, and it's a generous serving, 927 calories, 88 grams of carbs, 59 grams of fat. Oh boy, yeah. So it's not one to eat the evening before your fasting lipid or your glucose profile. No way. But a thimbleful here or there, yeah, special occasions. All right, let's travel a bit more. And we'll go to something geographically centric and Christmassy in the same right. This is a county, Lancashire, and it's particularly known for, Manchester is a very northern industrial city in England, and outside of it is a village called Eccles, and there is a baked good named after Eccles, Eccles cakes. So the story goes, you can see where Eccles is. It's about 9 o'clock on the map outside the city center of Manchester. 1793, a man named James Birch has a shop on the corner of Vicarage Road in Eccles, and he starts selling these little pastry encased small flat raisin cakes, and they catch on like a house of fire. In fact, they're a little bit unusual. They sell Eccles cakes throughout the country, and some food items from the UK, they carry a designation of origin that they have to have been made in a particular place to carry the name. So, for example, there's a town called Melton Mowbray, and they are famous for pork pies. In fact, they shorthand it. Here's a Melton Mowbray. It's a little pork pie that looks like a hockey puck. Well, you can't call it a Melton Mowbray unless it's made in Melton Mowbray. And the same goes for Cornish pasties. To be Cornish, they should be made in Cornwall, the farthest southwest county in England. They're kind of hand pie. They're a meat-filled pan pie. But Eccles are not this way. You can make them anywhere and still call them Eccles cakes. How do they get linked to Christmas? This guy. Interesting. So he's a bit of a controversial figure, Oliver Cromwell. So his dates are 1599 to 1658. Here's a clue of his popularity. In 1658, he dies of natural causes, in fact, a bladder infection. They dig him up and posthumously execute him in 1661. They chop off his head from his corpse. Really? He's not a popular fellow, but why? So he's a general, and he's responsible for the English Civil War and ultimately the beheading of Charles I, the end of the monarchy for now. And who steps in? He does. He takes over. He rules the UK as what he calls himself Lord Protector from 1653 to his death in 58. And then for a little while after, his son takes over. Ultimately, Charles II, the son of the man who lost his head, Charles I, is restored, the restoration. And so they come back to power, the monarchy does. And why is he linked to these cakes? He's a Puritan. He's very anti-Catholic. In particular, he's anti any frivolity, any pageantry or ceremony that goes along with any religious holiday. So there's a law that strips out all of this kind of things that would happen on Sundays. They'd have festivals and they'd sell Eccles cakes. No, done, gone. So Oliver Cromwell ruined Christmas. That you hear quite a bit. So it's a bit more nuanced than that. So Eccles cakes get lumped into the things that were on the ban list there for a while. Victoria sponge, sometimes called Victoria sandwich. It's everywhere. You can zhuzh this up for the holidays. More on that in the next slide. What is it? Highly traditional. So you've got they would call them sponge cakes. These are just nice yellow cakes. And you've got buttercream in the middle. Traditionally, it's strawberry jam on top of the buttercream. They plop the next cake layer on. They don't frost it like Americans put frosting all the way around. They just dump icing sugar. They sprinkle it on the top and call it done. So my favorite quote about it, you will encounter a Victoria sponge in most tea rooms in England. It will be a friendly encounter. Oh, yes. And if they didn't carry it, most tea rooms in England, I'd say they wouldn't be long in business. People there are cult followings to good Victoria sponge. And it was a favorite of Queen Victoria. So for the holiday season, there's a recipe that you can riff on the jam, basically. Instead of the traditional strawberry in the center, this one is being made from frozen berries, red wine, and holiday spices, kind of like mulled jam. Ooh. And then as far as the topper on top, they get a little more festive, candied oranges, red currants, star anise, cinnamon sticks white, and milk chocolate trees. So that recipe is on the website too, next to where this packet lives. Next, this is a strange one, I'd say, because I noticed when I lived there that at Christmas time, a French dessert was super popular, bûche de Noël, Christmas log. And usually I wouldn't have thought that were true because if you want to be completely sweeping and generalizing, the British and the French don't always get along. Are they adopting their holiday traditions? They have. So Bûche de Noël is very popular as a UK special occasion Christmas and holiday dessert. You see it a lot frozen in the freezer cases. So it's made, this one in particular has a raspberry mousse in the middle, and it's been rolled up in a jelly roll form in chocolate cake. And they coat it in chocolate ganache. They rake it with a fork. And before they coat it, they frost it. They cut it on the bias. They have it on a diagonal and fit it together again like a Y shape to make it look like a log. So they're raking it with the fork. And then traditionally, they decorate it with my French stinks, but here it is, fruit de bois, fruits of the forest, things like raspberries and blackberries and sometimes strawberries, but also they'll see these little mushrooms made out of meringue. So they do go all out. This is quite the project. If you are interested, though, here's a tip. King Arthur Flour does virtual classes. They do one on Bûche de Noël, and it starts the 19th of December. They tend to book up. So if you're interested in quite the holiday centerpiece and knowing how to do this exactly, you can learn in a fairly reliable way. So I alluded to clotted cream. It's in the category of all of the caloric things that you can put on your British desserts. And when I moved to the UK, the expats gave me some advice. Some of it wasn't always good advice. And here was one bit. You know, when you move over there, you're going to lose weight. They walk everywhere. The portion sizes are smaller. Well, people don't eat out as much. That's all true. But what they weren't saying is the heap of things calorie laden that they're putting on their desserts, puddings. And this is in that category. So it sounds horrible. Clotted cream. Why would you ever put the word clot in a dessert item that you actually wanted to entice people to eat? I cannot answer this question. It is originally from the southwest of England. Devon and Cornwall are the two southwest counties. One ingredient, sweet whipping cream. That's it, heavy cream. And if you were to make it at home, which you can, you have to seek out non-ultra pasteurized heavy whipping cream. That is not so high heat treated because you need that heat reaction in order for it to set up correctly. It's treated for 12 hours. It's baked at 180 degrees F. That's it. So you can do it in an oven or an instant pot. We have done the instant pot method, recipe in the packet. And my not terribly emotive British husband gives it a resounding 2 thumbs up. And he grew up in Cornwall after he moved away from the Midlands, so he ought to know. They'll fix it up a little bit for Christmas time too. They're putting brandy in it. Go figure. The Brits like to spice things up with alcohol from time to time. So you'll see it on mince pies, on a side. It's quite rich. You know, it's again in the category of things your cardiologist may or may not approve of, but you know, it's Christmas. So I have to stop somewhere. And here is a logical point. So I will point you in one direction, particularly. If you're interested in the recipe packet, I haven't checked chat to see if the link to it might appear. The Celine Library has that, but a reliable way to get to it on your own is my website. The website is called Tea with Claire, CLAIRE.com. So under the description of this talk, presentations and events, there's the packet. And there's a side recipe for that Victoria sponge made out of mulled spices jam. And I do a Facebook page offering of things that I find interesting, usually food. It seems like I gravitate to that. The other thing to make you aware of, if you're at all into fun travel, you might be interested in my memoir. It just came out the last day of August. It has hit #1 England travel a few times. Sometimes I beat Rick Steves and Bill Bryson, which is great. I wouldn't have expected that. It's called High Tea and the Lowdown, and you can buy it pretty much anywhere online. You can buy it from my website electronically, and the audiobook just came out last week. I have recruited my spouse to say his own lines. What a masterful bit of casting there, I think. So if it sounds intriguing, by all means, check it out. And I will come back to you. Here I am. And I'll have a little bit there. I just see Celine put the link. If you'd like that recipe packet, it's in the comments here. Again, you can pull it off my website too. But before I forget, I'm going to show you steaming. So I have steaming for dummies, put it that way. This says sticky toffee pudding mold. You could use it for any sort of cake that you steam. Mine's hollow, and that's because it'll help it steam through faster. But why I like it, and you do not need one of these. You can very easily use a Pyrex glass dish. It's a bit of a nanny. So when steaming, water bath to this level, it tells me that that's about halfway up. And then in the middle, in the actual steaming basin, it says, do not fill above this level. The pudding then has room to expand, right? Because it's a cake and it's got leavening in it and it does raise a bit. So if you were making this, I'd said that you just, if you don't have one of these, and understandably so, you can put greased wax paper with a tinfoil topping, and then you wrap it. You wrap it underneath, just like a Christmas present. And what you're doing is you're giving yourself a handle to pull this out of the hot water bath. This shows a bow on this side here. I like mine in the middle. And that's purely for safety's sake. I just, again, it's the burn unit. I've been scarred by the near miss of the flaming Christmas pudding. So because it's level in the center, then I find it's easier to get to. So yeah, it just goes underneath a couple times, up into the top, tie your bow, and that's how you're going to use the handle to retrieve it when you're done. All right, so I will ask if you had any questions. I think we're a small enough group. You'd be welcome to unmute and ask, or if you think of anything, just pop it into the chat. This is where I need my wait music. I don't have any to hand, and I certainly don't want to sing you anything. So, anything you can think of. I'm thinking of one from last night. I was given some good questions. It was this: is there any food items that you and your husband disagree on? UK, or did I? Someone had asked, did I eat beans on toast? And I do. I like it. And then my father saw me do this in the US and asked what happened to me, unquote. That happens, but yeah, we do have a fair few. There's a condiment called Marmite. It's a yeast paste. They put it on toast in small amounts. I can't handle it, but we agree to disagree. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, so last call. Anything from the libraries in particular?
I just want to thank you for presenting and thank everyone for coming. If we have no other questions, then I guess we are all set for the night.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the invite. It's been a pleasure, and I'll say good night for now. Oh, I just saw one.
Yeah, we
I
just got one up.
Okay. Jim is asking, is the plum pudding the same as the Dickens Christmas Carol? Yes, that was what they're referring to. It would have been, since it was from the Middle Ages forward, they certainly had it in Victorian times. That's when Albert of Victorian Albert fame started to introduce the sixpence into the pudding too. And then I just see things. So good job, Jim. Got one in under the wire here. So. All right. Well,
thank you
I
all for
will
coming.
say good night. Thanks so much. Good night.